Hello and welcome to the Celtic Way morning briefing. We're joined today once again by Alison McConnell. How's it going, Alison? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too, John. It's a snowy Glasgow this morning.
It's snowy Inverclyde as well. Not quite as bad as up there, I think. But so since I last spoke to you, as I say, I've not seen you since New Year. So since I last spoke to you, Celtic have signed 3 players and they've let 2 go as well. So given me and Tony have spent the last few days almost exclusively chatting about arrivals and potential arrivals, I thought we'd start with departures and potential departures with you today. So first up, we'll just quickly cover the 2 that have actually left. So first up, Ewan Henderson away to Hibs, loan then permanent in the summer, and Liam Shaw on loan to Motherwell. So just quickly, what's your thoughts on those 2?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think Ewan Henderson's an interesting one. I think the glimpses that I saw of him, I thought he looks like a prospect, but I think he's probably at an age now where he needs to be playing regular football. I think Hibs is probably a good club for him to go to and develop. I was a bit surprised at the agreement to let him go in the summer permanently. I thought maybe it might have been a loan deal just with a view to seeing how that worked, but quite clearly Celtic have decided that they're going to cut ties and the boy has needs to go now and advance his career. But he's one that I think a few people might keep an eye on. I thought he definitely looked as though he had something about him when he first came into the team. I think it'd be under Neil Lennon and I think Brendan Rodgers even. I think he might have come in. I think he might have played in Brendan Rodgers' last game actually against Motherwell, and then came in. Shaw going to Motherwell I think makes absolute sense. I think it didn't matter really where he was going. St Johnstone were also kind of keen on him. I think he just needed to get game time. He needs to go and play. He's featured sporadically this season. I think you need to be getting game time and then come back and see where it places you in the hierarchy of the team in the summer.
Rab McCune there wishing Henderson well on his departure. Simon Thomas with a comment here that's the kind of thing I'd mentioned the other day when it looked as if maybe Liam Shaw was going to go on loan, especially with Liam Shaw, not so much with Henderson, but especially not now that he's going to be leaving permanently. But I'd kind of pointed out that I would quite like to see Shaw, and even if it was at Urugide as well, if he's maybe going to go on loan, staying in Scotland, because I think primarily there's still an adaptation to be had there with the Scottish game that you wouldn't get if you sent them back to England somewhere on loan. The only concern I expressed to Tony yesterday about Liam Shaw's move to Motherwell was maybe the style of play that he's getting into at Motherwell. But apart from that, I reckon, as I say, staying in Scotland's a good idea. And just now, Motherwell are like almost a feel-good club with the season that they're having. So I think that is a good environment for him to go into as well, rather than maybe a relegation scrap with a team that maybe tries to play a better brand of football, maybe like Ross County. So there's pros and cons there for me as well that it's Motherwell, but at least he's staying in Scotland, which I think was the main thing for me. And as Simon's there, it's I think it means the Premiership specifically rather than the rest, but at least they're staying in the Premiership.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think Motherwell have been very inconsistent this season. I think overall, when you look at where their league position is just now, on the face of it, it looks like a decent campaign, but I think it's been fairly up and down for them. I'm sure they'll be looking to cement top 6 place and just have a bit more regularity and a bit more consistency of performance in the second half of the season. And I think it's a good move for him. I think I would agree with you in terms of just acclimatising to the demands of the league. I think when you look at somebody like Chris Ayer, who came in and went to Kilmarnock, and the ability then to just find your feet a wee bit in a new environment and a new culture, I think it can be beneficial.
That was the comparison I made with Tony for Tony yesterday about Ayer. Obviously, he had the added stress, if you want to put it that way, of kind of changing position as well into the bargain. But that was the comparison I made because I thought it makes sense that it's almost a culture acclimatisation as well as a football one. So staying in Scotland would benefit in that way. But staying with the midfield, and don't worry, I'm not going to go all proclaimers on you here, but Sorrow. He's been linked with a move to various clubs from the MLS to the Middle East. So would your heart be broken by that one, Alison?
Again, it's another one. I think he's been utilised at times when there has been a need for it, but I think he's found it very, very difficult to dislodge a favoured middle 3, and that 3 that have kind of been asked to go to the well repeatedly. Callum McGregor, Tom Roderick and David Turnbull. Near beaten at times has come in when one of those has dropped out. I think he'll maybe be looking at the players that have just come into in the window and thinking where do I fit in here? Am I going to start? Does it make sense for me to go somewhere and get a game where I'm going to be playing regularly? I think he's, again, at an age where he probably wants to be playing first team football. I think at the minute, I do think the squad is bloated. I think there's a lot of, numerically, there are a lot of players in there, and I think it makes sense to just try and slim the squad a bit. I know we spoke about depth, but I think really what you're speaking about is quality and being able to bring in like for like in certain positions. And I think it makes sense if there are players that you don't feel are trusted in terms of playing every week in a first team role. I think it maybe makes sense to allow them to go and develop their careers elsewhere.
Well, you mentioned there about maybe getting pushed further down the pecking order. Simon Thomas made the point there that the Japanese players comes in. I mean, Ideguchi is a box-to-box midfielder. Primarily, he's going to, I think, probably compete for the number 6 role, which is where Soro tends to play. And even when Soro's come on as a sub and actually done not bad, it's been maybe kind of, when he said a wee bit of freedom to push forward a wee bit, but he's ultimately not that kind of player as well. Hatati's a midfielder for me. I mean, I know Tony sees him maybe playing at left back. I think he's going to be a midfielder mostly. In terms of Soro's season so far, it's not quite the same as Liam Shaw and Ewan Henderson in the terms that he's played 726 minutes, which is about the equivalent of eight full games. So it's not quite the same as Sean Henderson, who've almost not kicked the ball at all. But except for a few moments, and as I say, it's even mostly been as a sub. It's not really been an impressive enough impact from Soro that if a team does bid for him, then Celtic really should be saying no, is it?
I would agree with you. I think you've seen over the course of the last 18 months or so enough to make a judgment on that. I don't think he looks up to the kind of standard. I'm not sure entirely that he's the kind of player that Ange Postecoglou wants in the system that he's playing. I'm not sure that he's a good fit for it. And I would anticipate that if a bid comes in that is financially favourable to both parties, then I don't think Celtic would stand in his way at all.
Rad McCune making the point there that Beaton as well has managed to get himself back into the first team, at least rotation reckoning. So that's another obstacle in the way of Soro. And obviously James McCarthy sitting there with a 4-year deal, so it's unlikely he'll be going anywhere. So through a process of elimination, you would think of the kind of not young midfielders, then you would think Soro's probably the prime candidate to leave. I suppose the only other concern for me I have in terms of letting players leave, and you kind of touched on it there, is that yes, the number of so-called first team players is quite large, but we've seen in the first half of the season that outside maybe 13 or so players, it's quite a steep drop off in quality. So in general, I'm not sure that more players should be going out than coming in this window, even though that the squad is quite bloated. What's your thoughts on that in terms of the quality versus quantity and what it actually means for game-by-game replacements?
I think it becomes very difficult to have a settled squad and a happy squad when it's just too big. I think sometimes you need to trim your numbers. I appreciate the point that you're making, and it remains fairly uncertain times that we're in. If you had to test positive, if you have to have a COVID outbreak in the camp, you're maybe down 6-8 first team players, but you're still going to be obliged to play games as much as you can, given now how condensed the fixture calendar is. I take your point. I think I think Celtic have struggled at points in this season. What I would say though is that I think they were hindered by injuries to the same areas at one point. They played the last 5-6 weeks without a recognised front three or without their favoured front three. And when Kyogo has come back, he's not been fit or not been properly fit, coming in and back out again. Which I think in some ways just comes down to bad luck. I'm not sure if you can adequately prepare for that, but I would say I think definitely a few players and some high profile players would probably be looking to go out, and it would be in Celtic's interest too to allow them to go. And I'm thinking here maybe of Vasilis Barkas, who came in a fairly strong contract, with strong financial contract. It's fairly clear that Joe Hart's an unambiguous number one. And I think, again, I think Barkas would be keen to go and try and resurrect his career and get back to playing, given the age he's at and where he'd been before he'd come to Celtic in terms of playing international football and Champions League football. I can't imagine that he's happy to settle just now for being a number 2 in what's been a very difficult 18-20 month period for him.
I think there's plenty. I would probably agree with you there, because do you really need, if you count Conor Hazard as well, 4 keepers? Probably not. And Barkas, you would think, would probably fetch the most money of all 4 of them, even with the poor kind of spell that he's had. But again, that all obviously depends on a shooter being there to take him. Yeah. So far, I mean, there's plenty made the case in the comments that actually a true backup keeper nearer to Hearts' quality level would actually be a beneficial addition. I don't think I've said it in my kind of pre-January transfer window kind of state of play. I wouldn't expect that at all. I think there's already 4 keepers there. I think even if 2 were to leave, I don't expect a third to be brought in, that kind of thing.
I agree with you. I don't think so either, and I think it becomes very difficult sometimes when you've got 2 keepers of similar quality like that to keep both happy. I think it's almost impossible to try and keep the balance of your squad just right. I think it's a difficult act. I think it is quite a balancing act to make sure that you have someone pushing your first choice goalkeeper and that there's someone else there, a reliable deputy. But I think when you have 2 who are really vying for the number 1 shirt, it can be quite difficult too.
It's a difficult thing to do, because if you've got 2 keepers that are relatively close in ability, then one of them's going to be annoyed at some stage. Certainly if they're the same kind of age as well. It's not going to be someone like, for instance, maybe Tom Heaton going back to Man United specifically just to be back up and learn the younger ones the ropes and stuff. That's not the kind of thing that Celtic have got here. Hart is not only the older of the 4 keepers, but also the best of the 4 keepers. Bain almost suits being a backup because he's never really going to be the number 1. But sometimes at some stage you would like someone to be the backup that is capable of being the number 1 if something was to happen. So that's, I think, where that maybe comes from a lot of the comments that we've had in the last few weeks, suggesting that maybe the only keeper that should stay is Hart. But I'm going to move to Simon's comment here. He's commented that twice. Depth, Sean, depth. Yes, Simon, that's the aim of the game. And on that note, I'll not be getting the depth chat out today, but well, kind of. But there have been various reports linking Celtic with more wingers and forwards. Now, we talked about Kyogo and stuff there, but I want to focus on the wingers because we seem to be getting linked with like Martin Boyle from Hibs, Zinedine Ferhat from French side Nîmes, AZ winger Albert Goodwinson, and of course Ange Postecoglou's already brought in Dyson Maeda as well, who, as much as I see him maybe filling in across the front line, he's probably primarily going to play off the left, I think. So what I'm getting at here, Alison, is that with Jota and James Forrest returning to fitness, Karamoko Dembele back in training, lest we forget, there are 6 wingers already on the books for 2 starting spots, and maybe 7 if you count Owen Moffat's recent elevation to the first team. So if these persistent links with other wingers coming in are going to bear fruit, then you would think at least 1 or 2 maybe need to go out on loan for me. So how would you fancy that type of move for Mikey Johnston?
Yeah, I think I would absolutely be in favour of it. And I think he would too. I think he's missed a lot of football over the last few years because of injury problems. I think he needs to be playing consistently. I'm not sure that opportunity is going to come at Celtic if and when everyone is fully fit. If Jota and James Forrest are both fit and available, and you have Maeda back in there too, you have Kyogo, you have got a fairly quality front 3 all jostling for those spots. I would find it hard to see where he fits in when everyone's available. I think he's a player that can frustrate at times. I think you can see he's got something. I think he's got a good skill set. I think you can see the movement that he has. I think there's elements of his game that he could do with working on in terms of decision making. And I think maybe exposure to first team football on a regular basis might enhance that development.
I agree with you. I think I'm still not quite ready to totally cut ties, if you want to put it that way. But he's not everyone's cup of tea. That's clear with the comments alone. But given the injury history he's had as well, which I realise some people say, well, that's just the way it goes. People get injured. But at the ages that he's had the injuries, it's prevented sort of prolonged exposure to first team football. And I think that's the benefit of him going out on loan. because if he was to go to a team where it's not just regular football, but it's regular football as an actual key piece of a team and not just as an impact sub or a rotation piece, I think it would benefit him. And I always go back to, and I kind of mentioned this with Tony earlier in the week, I go back to Ryan Christie's loan spell at Aberdeen. That was the making of him, albeit he did have exposure to first team football at Inverness, Cali Thistle as well before that. But it did make him, if you want to put it that way, he came back a player revitalised. I don't even know at the time if many thought he would make the breakthrough at Celtic, but certainly that he'd carved out a career for himself, like going back to a team like Aberdeen or maybe somewhere else. But he ended up taking his chance at Celtic, and I think he was a really good player for Celtic, despite the criticism that he got last season. So I would maybe be glass half full looking at Mikey Johnston if he was to go out on loan, that he would maybe have that kind of experience rather than the numerous other experiences that Celtic have sent players out on loan and they've not really made an impact when they come back. Because I do think that the talent is there. I think there's a reason that Brendan Rodgers liked him. There was a reason that Neil Lennon wanted to play him as well. And although Ange Postecoglou's only had limited kind of chances to play him in a way, he still has played him more than the likes of the other players that we spoke about today that have left and left on loan or in Henderson's case permanently. So I think that would be, overall, I think it's a risk worth taking, especially if Celtic are going to be linked with wingers to the extent that there are going to be other wing players coming in. And as Rab's comment that I put on the screen a minute ago said, it would almost remove an obstacle to Karamoko Dembele getting more game time as well, who is not only younger but has had his own injury worries as well. So how do you think that would maybe, do you think that is a benefit that maybe Dembele, who himself was actually running out of time on a contract as well, as far as I'm aware, but Ange liked him, is that the kind of thing that would make maybe his accelerated development?
I think your dog could something to say about it, but what I'd say is I think the Karamoko Dembele one's an interesting one, especially if there's going to be a contract offer. I think obviously there's been a few clubs sniffing about it already. I don't think he'll feature particularly regularly, other than as a peripheral first team player for the remainder of the campaign. But it would be interesting to see how he coped in a first team environment, given the hype that you've heard in and around him for ever since he played in an under-21 game when he was 14 or whatever it was in Brendan Rodgers' regime when he came in, and he was basically a kid playing against men. I think ever since then there's been you invited a tremendous amount of interest and attention onto him with that call. But in terms of Mikey Johnston, I fully take the point. I think going and playing at a team where you have a responsibility every week, where there are demands on you to try and win points for survival, for all sorts of different reasons, I think is very different, and it's a completely different experience than coming in and being regarded as one of the young players and maybe just finding your way in a team. I think when you're part of a first team, a regular in a first team environment, and I think there's a different kind of pressure on you, and I think some players respond to that and grow in maturity because of it. And I think it would be interesting to see just how you fared there for maybe 6 months or so. And I would go back to the point, I think if everyone is fully fit, I'm not sure where he fits in or how often he's going to start.
Yep. Okay, before we wrap it up, I've got quite an interesting comment here. Sitting through a thunderstorm with us on the south coast of New South Wales, Australia. So stay safe, Justin, first and foremost, but good to see you joining us to get yourself through that thunderstorm. But before we wrap it up, just want to remind the rest of you that if you're watching on YouTube, you'd be doing us a big favour by hitting that subscribe button so you get a notification when we go live, and an even bigger favour if you actually subscribe to the Celtic Way website to read more in-depth analysis, opinion and all the rest of it. So thanks for your contribution, Alison. Thanks again for your comments, guys. Much appreciated. We'll catch you again on Monday.
Take care.